Welcome to Everything Casual, bringing you original football casual videos from the golden era of the 80s and 90s, right up to current day. Football away day stories and historic clashes between football firms. Subscribe so you don't miss out. We upload videos every week.
When Celtic and Ajax meet on the pitch, most supporters expect football, noise, colour and atmosphere. But over the years, their meetings have spilled far beyond 90 minutes into city centres, railway stations, pubs and narrow streets, leaving behind broken glass, injured supporters, police investigations, and a question that still hasn't been fully answered. Is Celtic versus Ajax truly a rivalry? Or is it simply a series of violent encounters that spiraled into something far more hostile than anyone expected? And if you've ever travelled to one of these games or witnessed any of these moments yourself, do you believe this is a real rivalry or just history, repeating itself when two volatile travelling supports cross paths in Europe? Because to understand how tensions between Celtic and Ajax reached the levels seen in recent years, we have to go back to the early meetings between the two clubs in European competition, long before headlines began talking about arrests, injuries, and organised attacks, when football itself was still the main focus, but tensions were quietly building beneath the surface, particularly as European away travel became more intense and supporter groups across the continent began developing stronger identities, reputations, and rivalries that extended beyond geography. And by the early 2010s, both clubs carried large travelling supports with strong reputations. Celtic, widely known across Europe for bringing thousands of loyal supporters to away matches, often described as passionate but also fiercely protective of their own, while Ajax supporters, particularly elements linked to the club's harder supporter culture, had developed a reputation in European away scenes for organisation and confrontation when rival fans crossed paths, and when the clubs were drawn together during the 2013 UEFA Champions League campaign, few could have predicted how quickly tensions would ignite into something far more dangerous than simple football rivalry. Because before the return fixture even took place on the pitch, trouble had already begun in the streets of Amsterdam, where large numbers of travelling Celtic supporters gathered in the city centre ahead of the match, with Dutch police deploying plainclothes officers amid intelligence warnings that clashes were possible, and what followed became one of the earliest major flashpoints between the two fan bases, as reports emerged that a large group of Celtic supporters became involved in confrontations with undercover police officers, resulting in multiple officers being injured, with at least one knocked unconscious during the chaos, and bottles and sticks reportedly used during the violence, leaving several officers requiring medical treatment for broken noses, cuts, and head injuries. And in the aftermath, arrests were made and several Celtic supporters were later brought before courts in Amsterdam, with 5 ultimately found guilty of violence against police officers, receiving prison sentences ranging from several weeks to 2 months, while another individual was acquitted, marking one of the first legal consequences connected directly to the clashes between the two sets of supporters. And even at that early stage, the narrative was already becoming complicated, with conflicting accounts emerging about what exactly had triggered the violence. Some reports claiming Celtic supporters had launched an unprovoked attack on plainclothes officers, while others suggested tensions had been building throughout the day, fueled by confrontations between rival groups of supporters in the city centre. And if you were present in Amsterdam during those hours before kick-off, what really happened from your perspective? Was it spontaneous chaos, or something that had been brewing long before the match itself? Because as the Champions League fixtures continued, tensions did not fade. Instead, they followed both clubs back to Glasgow, where Celtic Park hosted the return fixture in what was already shaping up to be a volatile atmosphere. And during that match, reports surfaced of unrest inside the stadium itself, with seats torn from their mounts and thrown towards security personnel and police lines separating the opposing supporters. One seat reportedly landing near a line of stewards tasked with preventing Ajax fans from moving toward the Celtic sections, while further disturbances were recorded behind police cordons after the final whistle, prompting UEFA to review the events and consider disciplinary action. And once again, authorities were quick to point out that while the majority of supporters on both sides had behaved without incident, it only took a relatively small group to create scenes capable of overshadowing the football itself. And those scenes did not end inside the stadium, because beyond the official fixtures, tensions continued in the days surrounding matches, with reports emerging from Amsterdam that Celtic supporters had complained about being targeted in city streets, alleging that rival fans had thrown missiles and engaged in confrontational behaviour before the match had even begun, while Dutch police insisted they had acted on intelligence, suggesting potential disorder from visiting supporters, resulting in a large-scale security operation involving both uniformed and plainclothes officers. And as arrests mounted and fines were issued, with dozens of individuals detained and later released after paying financial penalties, the sense of hostility between the two sets of supporters began to take on a life of its own, no longer confined to football grounds, but spilling into wider supporter culture, including banners and chants that carried deeper meaning than simple match-day banter. One of the most controversial being the display of a banner containing the phrase "Fenian bastards" during a fixture between the clubs, a phrase widely recognised as a sectarian insult aimed at people of Irish Catholic heritage, particularly relevant given Celtic's historical roots within Irish immigrant communities in Scotland, and the banner led to disciplinary action from UEFA, including financial penalties imposed on Ajax, highlighting how tensions between the two supporter groups were now crossing into cultural and identity-based territory, raising further questions about whether this hostility was purely football-related or tied to deeper symbolic clashes that extended beyond sport. And if you followed European football culture closely, you'll know that symbolism often plays as large a role as the football itself, particularly when clubs with strong historical identities meet on continental stages. And by the time the clubs faced each other again in subsequent years, tensions had already escalated to a point where violence was no longer a distant possibility, but a realistic expectation. And perhaps the most shocking example of that escalation occurred in November 2015, when Ajax travelled to Glasgow for a Europa League fixture, a night that would become infamous not for the football played inside Celtic Park, but for the violence unleashed outside its gates, particularly in the east end of the city, where intelligence warnings had already suggested that visiting hooligans might attempt organised attacks on establishments associated with Celtic supporters. And despite those warnings, events unfolded with terrifying speed when a group estimated that up to 40 masked individuals descended on several pubs popular with Celtic fans, including venues along the Gallowgate area, launching what witnesses later described as a highly coordinated assault, smashing windows, attacking staff, and targeting patrons inside, with most establishments managing to secure shutters in time to protect those sheltering within. But not all were so fortunate, because inside one targeted bar, the Hoops Bar, the violence reached levels that shocked even seasoned observers of football disorder, when the bar's owner, Neil O'Donnell, was brutally attacked with what was later described as an iron bar, suffering catastrophic facial injuries that required extensive surgery, leaving him with 3 titanium plates permanently fixed into his face, while another victim, electrician Grant Kelly, was dragged into the street and subjected to repeated kicks by a group of attackers, sustaining fractures to his cheekbone and jaw, losing multiple teeth, and later being found disoriented and covered in blood after wandering through Glasgow Central Station with no memory of how he arrived there. And the brutality of the attack sparked widespread outrage across Scotland, with victims, politicians, and members of the public demanding justice against those responsible, particularly after investigators, using intelligence supplied by Dutch authorities, were able to identify 15 suspects believed to have been involved in the violence. Yet despite those identifications, legal proceedings took an unexpected turn when Scottish prosecutors ultimately transferred responsibility for the case to authorities in the Netherlands. A decision that drew fierce criticism from legal experts, victims, and supporters alike. Many arguing that had the attackers been local individuals rather than foreign visitors, immediate prosecutions would have followed, raising further questions about accountability in cross-border football violence cases. And even years later, debate continued about whether justice had truly been served or whether the complexity of international law had allowed perpetrators to avoid consequences altogether. And if you followed that case at the time, what do you believe should have happened? Should suspects have faced trial in Scotland? Or was transferring the case abroad the only realistic option? Because the fallout from that night did not mark the end of hostility between Celtic and Ajax supporters, instead it became another chapter in an ongoing narrative of confrontation that resurfaced whenever the two clubs crossed paths, even during matches that held little competitive significance, such as pre-season tournaments, where tensions once again flared in the stands during a meeting in northern Italy, where both sets of supporters were separated by barriers inside a stadium overlooking Lake Como. Yet despite physical separation, hostilities erupted as objects were thrown between sections, security forced to intervene, and rival groups shouting across barriers while waving flags and banners that carried political symbolism, including displays linked to international causes that have, in recent years, become increasingly visible in European supporter culture. And while those incidents did not result in the same level of injury seen during earlier clashes, they reinforced the idea that whenever Celtic and Ajax supporters gather in proximity, tensions remain close to the surface, waiting for a spark to ignite confrontation. And across online forums, supporter groups and commentators have continued debating the origins of this hostility, offering theories ranging from historical symbolism to political identity clashes, while others argue the rivalry itself may be exaggerated, suggesting that many of the incidents were simply the result of two large travelling supports colliding under high-pressure European match conditions, rather than a long-standing feud deliberately cultivated over decades. And that raises perhaps the most important question of all. Is Celtic versus Ajax truly a rivalry in the traditional sense? Or is it a chain reaction of escalating encounters, each one fueling the next, creating a perception of hostility that grows stronger with every new incident? And if you followed these matches over the years, or travelled to any of the cities where these clashes unfolded, what details do you remember that never made it into official reports? Were there confrontations that went unrecorded, near misses that could have turned violent, or moments where tensions were diffused before headlines were written? Because understanding the full story of Celtic and Ajax means listening not only to official statements and media coverage, but also to the memories of supporters who stood in the streets, heard the sirens, and witnessed the chaos firsthand. And as European football continues to bring supporters from different cultures and backgrounds into shared spaces, the history between Celtic and Ajax stands as a reminder that football rivalries are not always born from geography or league competition. Sometimes they are forged in moments of confrontation, misunderstanding, retaliation, and memory, building layer by layer until even a friendly match can feel like unfinished business. Leaving us with one final question to consider. Do you believe Celtic and Ajax are destined to clash again when their paths next cross in Europe? Or has enough time passed for tensions to fade? And if the draw tomorrow placed these two clubs together once more, would supporters travel expecting football, or expecting trouble. If I have got anything wrong in this video, feel free to comment and let me know. Also, if you feel that you have any good Celtic stories to tell, particularly about the 70s and 80s era, the jungle, or Celtic skinheads back in the day, or even modern current away day stories, Green Brigade members, active service unit members, and you would like your story featured on here, anonymously, then you can contact me through Facebook. Just type in Everything Casual and my page will pop up. Celtic have a long, rich history, so I know there are lots of stories to tell. This channel is all about talking and sharing memories of the good old days, keeping history alive, and this is the platform to do it on. So reach out to me with some stories and I will put them on here. Thank you for taking the time to watch the video. I greatly appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this and would like to see more historic Celtic videos, I have a few on my channel, so click like and subscribe and you will be notified when I put a new video out. By doing so, you are also helping out channel grow. So thank you. See you next time.